I'm super excited to get into this afternoon. We're to the point, you guys. We're here. We're going to like start sharing out all the research. And I'm really excited to announce this first panel with Nielsen. Our friend Charlene Corley is the VP of Diverse Insights and Partnerships. She's a powerful ally who helps leverage Nielsen data in service of marginalized people and community power building. Nielsen is a global leader in audience measurement, data, and analytics, helping shape the future of media. So we're super excited to be able to lean into this conversation with Charlene today, and Crystal's going to be moderating for us. So we'll be back soon.
Thank you.
Everybody give it up for Charlene from Nielsen.
Okay. Should I say
It is so good having a DJ. Did you hear that? You got a little
welcome music?
Yeah, you did. I cannot say enough good things about this woman that we're getting ready to be in conversation with. Charlene, when did we first meet?
Gosh, I think it was a Zoom call in maybe late 2020.
Pandemic times.
Definitely pandemic times.
Yeah.
And just a funny story of I first found Illuminative scrolling on Instagram, thinking I knew how to be a good ally. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and of course the mascot debate was happening, and I was like, oh, just change it from the obvious slur to like something cool from the culture. And somebody from Illuminative responded to me and was like, no girl, that ain't it either. And so began my journey of trying to inform myself on how to be really a better, for real, legit ally and like talk what was important to the community. And then it turned into my day job at Nielsen, so thank you.
I knew when we really made a deep, profound connection and like we were becoming relatives because she was like, hey, check out these bee yellowtail earrings. And suddenly it was like, yes, you are one of us now. You're
Yes.
going down the rabbit hole of beautiful Indian bling. Well, we're so excited to finally be here because now this is it. This is the new research, right? And just to kind of level set, we did a similar size poll back in 2017, right? It was 2,500 people, and that's when you see those big statistics that we've been posting about 78% of people don't know anything about us, and you know, a lot of those things came out of that poll. So it was like one of the biggest and most important pieces of the research. It also costs us like hundreds of zillions of dollars to do back in the day. And what was amazing was in my building, you know, partnership and relationship with you, Charlene, and with Nielsen, but really it's about relationships, right? And I remember, I think we were sitting over coffee and DC, and it was like, I really have this dream, and you're like, well, and you know, Nielsen was able to use, I mean, is everyone familiar with Nielsen? Yeah, they're like a little company that does some stuff in media.
If you've seen a TV rating or how many people watch something, that's us.
Right, I mean, they're a big deal. And so the fact when they're like, we want to help you do this, and actually we will bring all the resources to bear and we'll do it for like $5, not really, but literally, and made this possible. And so we literally, I just was kind of a hot mess. I was like, here's Charlene, here's all the things we did back in, you know, 2017, and you and your team were able to recreate the poll, right?
Yeah, and shout out to the amazing team behind the scenes that just helped lend their expertise on how to frame questions and what the sample size needed to be, because where Illuminative is an expert at talking to the community, Nielsen can certainly talk to non-natives. And so we were like, if that's who you need to hear from, we can go out and get a couple thousand of them, no problem. And so just really proud and privileged to be a part of the amazing work you all are doing.
Well, I think we should just get on with it, should we? So, Miss Charlene, let's hear it. What were the
Alrighty.
big headlines coming out of this online survey?
Okay, so we're talking about the story that we've been told, and I mean that as a non-native person. Oh, excuse me. Everybody coming in? Can you hear me okay? All right. So as a non-native person, I think about that opening line to Rutherford Falls all the time of the greatest story never told is about native peoples, but we have been told a story. You know, a lot of it is about what was left out or what maybe has been glossed over, but there is a narrative that's out there for non-natives who have consumed it. And I think a big learning for me personally and for our team from the study was this is what folks think, feel, see, believe, and here's what that's based on. And we know that media coverage and representation has a ton to do with that. So we'll jump right in. This is really the basis of what we were trying to achieve and discover talking to non-natives in this study. As Crystal mentioned, it was over 2,500 respondents, and it represents the U.S. population, age, race, income, and I think a couple of other factors. So a really robust study, and a couple of different ways to cut this data. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me before we talked about, just how many people said they didn't know anything. 4 in 5 said, I really don't have much knowledge at all about Native peoples. And as an account to some of the progress that's been made through your work, that number in this study is 3 in 5. So we are seeing progress based on, hey, I do know a little bit more. And more importantly, folks are reaching out saying, I'm going out and I'm seeking. More than 40% of our respondents said, now I'm actually actively seeking on a regular basis information about this population. The question is, where are they finding it? Who wrote it? Who's telling them what? Those are the next level steps. Now that we have the appetite there, people are starting to get wise to, I really don't have a clue. And when I go to the Google machine, what's being served to me? When I go to social media, what is the algorithm bringing up for me? So let's dive into some of it. Again, some key findings. We're going to talk about a couple of different pieces of the research. Media representation, education, sports, rights and treaties, and then recap and go right into a Q&A. So near and dear to my heart, let's talk about representation in media. We have seen really just a renaissance in the last couple of years that has just been, groundbreaking. I think what was so shocking to me, though, is when you go to the country at large, there's still so many people who aren't aware of the amazing programming, film, TV, you name it, that's been made available over the last few years. So even though we have those folks who are now seeking out more information, in our study, only 1 in 5 knew or had watched content that was Native-led, so produced or written, directed by Native peoples. But overwhelmingly, our respondents did say that they recognize the importance of Native Indigenous actors and actresses playing those Native and Indigenous roles. So again, maybe a generation ago, that wasn't something on people's minds. Even, I am sad to say, in the year of 2023, I had a conversation with a colleague about why, yes, a great actor, a great white actor should not be playing a great Indigenous role, and here's why. So there's still some learnings to do there, but we've come a long way. What really, I think, jumps off of the page for me here is the opportunity for the media industry. We have almost 7 out of 10 Americans saying they're interested in seeing more content that's created by Native directors, writers, and producers. So the audience is telling you what they want, but it behooves you to try and maybe go do some of that. But I love these numbers together and saying, hey, I really do want to see that. I'm just having a hard time maybe accessing it. What service is it on? How much do I have to pay for it? When does it come on? So again, making those connections with the audience about low barriers to this kind of content and promoting it, investing in it, and getting it in front of those eyeballs is really critical because the market is there. We heard from a panelist earlier, I think it was MK, who was like, a good story is a good story. It's how you position them. We see this in my community all the time. There's a Black person involved, it's Black content. It's only for them. And that's just not how things work, especially for, as we see in younger generations where Nielsen has done research on our team that shows 87% of audiences show some level of interest in content that centers someone outside their own identity group. So I feel like all those numbers taken in together really just lay the groundwork for telling more, investing more, and getting that content out there. One interesting point to note from our research is that viewers are more likely to accept media portrayals of other people as true. And so we talk about all this desire and demand for more Native-led stories. I think what's an important reminder for the media industry is that we have an obligation to involve the folks with the lived experience and the expertise in telling these stories, telling your own stories, because I'm going to be more scrutinizing if you put a Black woman on the screen. I'm going to tell you what's right and what's wrong. But I'm more likely to believe, because maybe I don't have access or I don't have that lived experience of a Native person, I'm going to take that at face value. So the obligation there for the storytellers is very high, because our research validates over and over that folks outside of a community are more accepting of that storyline. We saw it in our study. I think it was 68% of our Native respondents said, I frequently encounter negative stereotypes when I see Natives represented. That number was 46% for non-Natives or overall. And so you see that gap of, yeah, sure, no problem. And people don't even know enough to maybe recognize what a trope or a negative stereotype is. So I want to make sure that we call that out, that, again, the obligation here is a little bit different. One of the important things for the power of representation, here's a couple of the outcomes that our respondents told us that, again, I think just, if you're talking about an untapped market, seeing Natives represented makes me want to learn more about the culture, learn more about the issues, importantly, especially in election year, and then support Native organizations, but, oh, by the way, go and spend some money with the Native-owned business. So the opportunity, again, for getting that representation in front of folks being extremely, extremely strong and high for positive outcomes. Switching gears to education, because this was a really interesting piece of the work for me, where there seems to be an increasing level of scrutiny around the education that we receive as non-Natives about the Native peoples, both present day and, of course, historical. 28% agree that their education about Native Americans was accurate, but about a third of folks weren't sure, and it's that unsure that I thought was really interesting, in addition to all the folks, the 44% who disagree that what they've been taught was accurate. Interestingly to me was, I think, among white respondents were the highest here, where white folks felt like, yeah, education was fine. But overall, we are starting to see this questioning of why things have been positioned a certain way. Another interesting point for me here with education was, no matter if you had a little bit of high school or a diploma or a PhD, that unsureness or that questioning of my education, of what I've received about Native peoples, was the same. And so no matter if you've got a PhD or a high school diploma, we're not sure.
Wow, that's so interesting.
I mean,
yeah.
So come on, education system. Anyways, going again into the education piece, over half of our respondents, we talk about some of those pervasive stereotypes that still exist, where people can maybe recognize. The most popular being that Native Americans overall live in poverty at 52%, or that Native Americans are alcoholics at 42%. So those are still two of the top things that come to mind as far as stereotypes that folks recognize. There were some positive perceptions, of course, about the community protecting culture and things like that. But these are two things that I think really will jump off the page or off the screen when they're put in front of folks without the proper context.
You know, it's just interesting, just to jump in, the two most pervasive stereotypes in 2017 were poverty, but also that we get everything for free. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a whole other sidebar about oh, girl, if you claim such and such, you don't have to pay taxes. Okay. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Not in this country. You gonna pay something.
You paying something. I don't care who you are.
Unless
you're really, really rich, and then you don't pay taxes.
All right. Bingo. So yeah, if you become a billionaire, maybe. So anyways, back on track. So again, just a reminder here, a big takeaway is we've gone from 4 out of 5 folks feeling completely uninformed about Native peoples to 3 out of 5. So that's progress, but that's still a lot of people. That's still a lot of people. And thinking about the diversity that's in this room, the number of tribes and nations and experiences that are out there, there's just so many stories to tell, and yet we continue to get the same version of a couple of different characters or paths. So hopefully we'll get the representation and the education aligned. Another big takeaway from the education piece of this work being that people are starting to question, they're starting to scrutinize that education, especially not getting that modern context. And one of the interesting things that popped here as well, you can see a clear shift in the numbers when we look by generation. Millennials and Gen Z were most likely to say, I did receive education in that modern context. But then when we looked at the question around, do you believe that Native Americans are a declining population? That was also highest among some of our younger respondents. So they're getting that current day education, but what exactly is being taught? Because the census numbers say
we're jumping by over 80%.
Hello.
Yeah.
So moving on to sports, and this is one of my favorite topics right now, just because of how quickly we have seen things dramatically shift. If you think about our first project together back in 2021, when we actually partnered with Nielsen Sports to survey some folks how they felt about changing the name, appropriation of Native cultures and Native culture and people as mascots. And back then, when we asked men, when you see Native people used as mascots, that's the only time that you see natives on screen, and 54% of men said yes. In this study, it was 40%. And so just from 21 to 23, we've seen that slide 10 points, which is insane. So just to, again, and just to go through some of the numbers from this research, 1 in 3 agree that sports names referencing Native Americans are culturally insensitive. 36% agree sports teams that use Native culture and mascots should change their name and imagery. And this actually declined a little bit from when we asked folks a couple years ago. We think that that's probably because the big elephant, the big offensive elephant that was in the room kind of got changed. And so if we also look back at the education section, it's going to take a lot more context and teaching around why, just like what had to happen for me in the DMs. Here's why all of this should change. But folks are still split because overwhelmingly, even from the natives who took our study, a lot of times that is when they're seeing the representation, because sports are such a pervasive part of the larger American culture. That might be the only time somebody's tuning in for live TV, is to watch a game. When I also think about the staying power of sports culture in this country, when we asked about notable natives, Jim Thorpe, over half of respondents still recognize, the legend that he is. Of course, some of our fabulous elected officials that we heard from earlier were also in that top and very recognizable, but nowhere near this person from how many years ago. I also I just want to point out that when we go back to that study from 2021 and people saying the only time I see that representation is if you're a mascot, cut to the WNBA draft, where you have the 8th overall pick is an indigenous woman. Alyssa Pilley, come on.
That's right, give it up.
Give sis her props. And almost 2.5 million people tuning in just to see her, not a mascot, a player, a pro, a recruited.
It's beginning of the change.
Come on now. That's, for me, a beautiful arc. And it's not just about, because there's a lot of chatter, I don't know if anybody's following women's basketball, there's a lot of news right now about one certain player, but trust me that sis is bringing her own power to this thing too, because one of the many sold out record-setting viewership games was Minnesota Lynx versus New York Liberty. It's the highest WNBA game on CBS ever.
I love
and
that.
Caitlin Clark
So
was
good.
not in it. So talk about native
right.
power. Again, I digress.
We
wanna
love
drop
it
some
when you
facts.
digress. It's the good, meaty stuff.
Another important theme that I think we saw from this research is allyship, where folks who have been historically excluded know enough to know, like, something ain't right over there. I don't got all the facts, but something ain't right. Y'all missed something. Like, I just know enough. I need to learn more, and I know y'all not doing them people right. So in here we found that our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Black Americans showed the highest support for banning Native mascots. And we saw shifts, I think, in these numbers as well for these populations from 2020, 2021, to now see the harm or to hear about some of the impact that that kind of appropriation has on their on Native peoples. And so again, solidarity, allyship building, all of those things really matter. When we start to show up together, folks get nervous. Here's another example, I think, of where education kind of falls short, but also where there's a disconnect from how we want to be an ally and then what that means for y'all in supporting you in present day. So overwhelmingly, the respondents agreed that the U.S. should honor the treaties, honor the sovereignty of tribal nations. What does that look like? I think that's where people like the disconnect starts to show up. And so we asked about some specific, current issues using Cherokee Nation. Again, about a third of our respondents were aware that Cherokee folks were entitled to a delegate in the United States Congress, and that person has yet to be seated. But 17% of our respondents thought that that was actually false or untrue. And then another 44% were unsure. So if you take that together, the majority of folks either don't know, aren't aware, or think that's actually, oh, you're kidding. Because why, like, no, you signed in a contract, so why, the government honored it, right? And so I think it's those disconnects where, again, present day context, super, super important. Present day issues and how that connects, super important, and not getting that full detail and context for non-Native people. So really powerful findings there for me. Key takeaway that non-Natives need those sources and coverage that they can trust to learn how to ally. And if we think about the broader news landscape, we heard from the board member earlier about just all the changes in journalism. We were just talking about that. The distrust that's in the media broadly, rightly or wrongly. But again, if I'm just going to social media or anybody can get a microphone and be a podcast or YouTube quote unquote expert, what are their motives? What is their facts that they're standing on, the research that's driving that? Because, and again, I think a lot about the influence of AI. Google results now will pull in AI suggested responses, could be hit or miss, whatever it's pulling from. And so if that's what people are relying on to build their foundation, is it in service of Native peoples, or is it just adding to the kind of soft foundation we're already standing on? And then, again, I think one of the key takeaways from this research that you'll see is solidarity. There are folks out there outside of the community, I think, ready to be in partnership and be in community with you. But again, we need the right sources of information, the right talking points, and again, in our local communities, that might look different for what those Natives need versus broadly or nationally how we show up together. Overwhelmingly, 77% of folks agreed that Natives actually face discrimination, and in some instances we had historically excluded communities saying, yep, they face more discrimination than my own identity group. On top of that, we had 2 out of 3 folks agree that seeing Native representation, again, made them want to learn more about the issues and about the culture, and then to go and actually support Native-owned businesses. And we know that, especially for diverse communities, that equity and investing in our own communities and repairing those economic harms is super important. And so when we're all trying to do that work, and again, seeing that representation, wanting to go out and find somebody to buy earrings from, or whatever that looks like, I think is important, not just the work, not just the messaging to our own circles, but where we actually put our dollars is important as well. So I think all in all, what's next is an opportunity for us to continue this work and dive deeper. I think the legacy that you have from these first few years of Illuminative is, like you said, setting the stage to just wake people up to this. And now we can go from the 101 to the next level and just give people the right sources, the right information. And I think we are poised for even more great things to happen. So thank you for allowing Nielsen to be a part of this work. I hope you learned some interesting facts, and I will yield my time.
Oh, well, okay, Madame. Yes, yes. I want to keep you on stage forever because I'm like, my brain is about to just explode. I mean, Charlene, thank you. where do I begin? One of the things, I'm like the ultra nerd, right, that like is constantly toggling back to the original Reclaiming Native Truth research, which we can just think of as a baseline. That had never been done before, right? So that's the starting point. So, and when we look at that now, 6 years later, where are we at? One of the interesting things as you finished up was talking about allies. And I'll never forget one of our researchers at the original convening back in 2017 laid out all this data and said, let me just tell it to you plain. If you imagine, like, we're trying to be seen, we're trying to be heard, like literally we're being told that people aren't even sure if we exist, right? And if we do, we live in a teepee and, I should be wearing a cradle board or something else is happening, right? So her point was the erasure is so profound. But if you imagined, right, that we turned up the volume, all of us as Native people, right now, we just cranked up that volume about we are here. And not only are we here, we're contemporary, we're all these things. It would not be enough. It would not be enough if every single Native person shouted from the rooftops because of how profound the erasure is. I mean, it's baked into systems. And I think that's like such a big takeaway. Like, right, it's baked into education,
Absolutely.
It's baked into popular culture and sports and media, law, policy, all the things. It requires allyship. We have to recruit people to be like lock arms. We need to make relatives. We need to recruit co-conspirators to be a part of turning up that volume, to talk about who we are today and what's important to us, right? So that is so key. And so in your points about allyship, one of the interesting changes that I've seen, and I think we're going to hear it more from some of the other research, is back in 2017, in terms of the Black community, they were not very close allies with us. They were like further down. It was, I think, more Latinos and like sort of women up at the top. And the same thing with API population. It was really, I think were like, right above the like, sorry, crunchy old white guys that, we all know and love. And so, but to see that these two populations, you'll see it, and I think you'll hear more in our next focus group presentation, there's been some movement. So I think these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. What has changed in 6 years? And I think one of the things is looking at post-George Floyd, right? And the conversations that started to be created, and I think, there seemed to be in 2017 so much distance between ourselves and our Black relatives when it felt like we should be so much closer. But I think that there's something that's been happening in the conversation, the organizing, things that are happening that we're seeing something shift.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what you're saying around, if we turn up the volume, it wouldn't be enough. I almost feel like in some senses, the way the media landscape is now, that's gotten worse. Because if you think about how algorithms work to feed us certain streams of content, or how things are, decisions are being made and in those rooms, or the fear around inclusion right now, I think that's what makes the data so powerful when you're saying, like, look at this broad, untapped market, and you're operating out of this legacy thinking and mindset, you're missing this huge opportunity. On the technology side, that's why, like, again, this real-to-real human interaction and allyship is so powerful, because I may not get served what I need to based on just the way technology works today. It takes the white folks in the room, it takes Black folks in the room, all these different communities knowing. Again, I know enough to know that we should probably bring in a Native in here. You're gonna put somebody in the story, like, it's not, I don't have the expertise, we need to go talk to somebody in the community. And so those conversations, again, you have to have those right sponsors or advocates in the rooms across the industry where that can happen, because we can't rely on the tech to do it, and we can't, we're not always at the table in order to do it. So the allies really do make a difference.
Well, and I really want to double tap on something that you just said, because I was in conversation with our board member, Cheryl Crazy Bull, earlier this morning. We were talking about the whole threat to DEI, right? That going to a Native education conference is like, ooh, no, that's DEI, I can't go, or whatever the thing is. But what you said is legacy thinking, right? So you've got all these folks running around saying DEI is a bad thing, and the Supreme Court saying this, and people are afraid of lawsuits, and it's not just education, it's in Hollywood, media, entertainment, across the board. People are pulling DEI back because there's some big boogeyman that nobody supports it anymore. But when, again, I think these are the moments when we look into the data and be like, this is BS. When you see that 87% of the people that Nielsen is surveying is saying, we want to see somebody outside of our identity group. and we'll be sharing more of the Nielsen data, but like some of the most exciting things I saw in there was like how much millennials and Gen Z people of color are leaning in, and they want to know more about Native peoples. They want diverse content.
Bingo.
And I will tell you, like, these numbers don't play, right? Because back in the day when I just had a big bag of research like this, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with it, and I got taken to Hollywood and taken on tour by, you know, Bird, Running Water, Heather Ray. They like were taking me all over the place to go meet with studios, and all of a sudden, all I had to say was 78% of the people we polled said that they want to know more, and all of a sudden they went, that's audience demand. That's market demand. That's what speaks to these people. And so this is how, like, those are examples of how the data can start to open the doors. I mean, the one thing I did see is we did fall 10 points, because back in 2017, it was 78% of people wanting to know more, that, you know, that audience demand. We've slid back 68%, you know, by 10 points, and it makes me wonder, like, what's happening? And I think those are some of the deeper questions we have to ask. But I think, you know, we were talking earlier, like, okay, Charlene, let's like get into it, because we are here not just to talk data, we're here about what we're gonna do about it. So seeing these numbers, it seems like a lot of the people that were in this poll were saying, we want to see more things in media, social media, TV and film, but then you got all this madness, you're talking about algorithms. I think all of us, anybody that follows Hollywood knows I don't know what's going on over there. It's like imploding on itself. So, you know, what were your takeaways when you saw that, and especially as you kind of pull back out the lens and think about the context of what's happening in media and entertainment right now?
Yeah, I think, of course, the younger respondents give us all a lot of hope that their expectations, table stakes is you will be inclusive of how we, you know, all of my complex identity will be in the content that I consume, or I'm going to find another option, period. So that gives us a lot of hope. But when we think about, that still leaves out a lot of the population of non-natives who also need this education, who need in their spheres of influence to be able to correct and gently guide folks into the right resources or away from maybe some harmful ways of thinking. And so I think on average, Americans are spending about 69 hours a week with media, most of that being with the TV screen. And so as important as, and as powerful as all the social media exposure and awareness has been, all that engagement, thinking of native TikTok and Instagram and all of that, that's still a big population, again, on that TV glass that we also have to reach. And, you know, I was thinking, well, you know, maybe it's an ad council, ad that's like, hey, did you know that, you know, there's this population of natives who live in urban centers, or that we've been citizens for 100 years or whatever, but just breaking that up, that TV experience up, where I think that's actually been a big part of it. Sort of the double-edged sword of the increased representation is, oh, I've seen a couple of TV shows, now I'm an expert, girl. I can tell you all about you. So that might be some of that that's driving it. It's like, you know, there are more options now in media to go and see natives represented. And so I think helping folks to understand that, you know, if you know a native's experience, you know one native's experience, you can't speak or generalize across, you know, everyone. And so I think there's just so much more to do, but we also have to remember some of these traditional ways of reaching folks and interrupt that behavior as well when it comes to television, even radio, and not just the digital landscape, even though that is super critical.
Well, and I remember I want to even pull back into some data that we were part of with you. I think it was last year, right, when we worked with our pop culture media department in Nielsen. But, you know, for us, like Rutherford Falls, Reservation Dogs, Prey, like we think about all these things and like we're so excited, but then you see that statistic that only 1 in 5 have actually seen this amazing content, and then you start to kind of get into it. It's like, oh man, I don't think these streamers, these studios are investing in the marketing dollars that are needed, because these are good shows. They're critical darlings, especially Reservation Dogs, right? Like,
and even with the level of, you know, the need for more promotion, we saw, I think it was for Res Dogs, brought in over 1 million new viewers to the Hulu platform. When we looked at our data, like anybody who was watching before, tuned, or wasn't watching before that show premiered and tuned in just to watch that show, it was over 1 million new viewers to that platform just to see that program. And then when you look at watch that program, and then stayed to find something else. And so we were starting to, with data, lay the groundwork for, again, this is a market and this is a draw. You have to let folks know where it is. So I think a lot about if they took that from Hulu and maybe just ran it on the broadcast network that they own, how much more powerful could that be by getting that into the different level of visibility? It's again, going back to the sports example, the more women's sports games that you air, the higher that viewership goes. The more accessible, the lower barriers to entry to this content that the industry puts out there, the more folks have tended to show up.
Well, I just think it's an important thing, like as we start to think about how we're organizing, what are the arguments, what's the advocacy that we're doing. I think we had this very brief moment that, remember the reckoning with racism? Does everybody remember that? I think, did we take care of it? It got all reckoned with? But clearly now it's like nobody cares that it's the right thing to do.
No.
For any, right? No, that is not we have to be constantly thinking about the arguments about it's the economic.
It's the money.
It's the money, and really kind of, I think we have to constantly just be really thinking about how are we kind of getting inside people's minds and trying to really lay the groundwork to shift hearts and minds, because appealing to values and what's right is not working right now.
The more I do this work, appealing to the hearts and mind is how we build allies, but focusing on the untapped market and the potential for growth if we invest is how we change the business. So it's those two different stories that I think we have to have. It's one set of facts over here when I'm trying to talk to my community and learn, and then it's another set of facts over here when I'm talking to clients who are looking for more information, because again, like it should, that should move us. But at the end of the day, it's capitalism. So, and the money is there, the opportunity is there, and Hollywood continues to be surprised by, we're seeing it right now in the headlines with the #1 movie at the box office. Like, oh my gosh, we had put all these other action movies out there, nobody went to go see them, and all these black and brown people showed up, and now we have $100 million worldwide. Who'd have thought? So, we just have to keep telling kind of over and over and showing them, but the data is so critical to that. Yeah. Well,
and I'm curious too, because at Nielsen, in our partnership with you, you all do so much with so many different communities, right? And so I think it would be really helpful, like when you look at the results of this survey, right? And you look at our level of representation or how people are perceiving us. Like, for example, how does that match with your community? And because I'm just like perspective about where we are in relationship to our other relatives from different communities.
Yeah, great question, because again, and you can go to nielsen.com/insights and download a lot of our research for free. We just put out a report in February around Black audience trends. African Americans are America's key audience. There's nobody engaging with more media than the black folks in this country. And so again, if you have that community saying, oh yeah, I want to see X, Y, and Z, girl, you better go run and produce something. You better greenlight something and put it in front of us. We also in that same study saw where we want to see more representation of our own stories on screen. We're also the most receptive to saying, I also want to see other people and their experience portrayed on screen. And so again, when we think about just untapped market, it's like we open the door for ourselves and want to bring other folks with us. I want to learn through my media engagement. But again, that level of scrutiny when it's my community on screen is different from I'm going to take you at face value if it's somebody else. And so untapped demand, that's just one community. And again, when I think about the nuance in building allies or that outreach, 55% of Black American media time is with TV. When you go to Asian or Hispanic Latino, 51% of their TV time is just streaming. And actually, they're more likely to have equal shares of time on their mobile device than with the TV screen. That's what we just found with the Asian American study we put out last month. So in each community, how you reach them, how you will resonate with them will look different. And how things like what really connects in somebody's story is potentially going to look different. There's a lot more, I think, on how to reach and resonate with folks there.
I just want to, that very point, and I think for all of us is the call to action. We have to just level up in our sophistication of our targeted outreach, organizing, right? One message, one size does not fit all, right? And I think that's the next level, is to really who are our allies? How do we get to them? How do we talk to them? How are we building that relationship with them? And I think that is probably the next challenge I feel like for Indian country we've got to work on. But we're going to go ahead and turn this open now to audience Q&A. I think we have some people running around with microphones. So I want to open up. Raise your hand. They'll come to you. Who's got a question for Charlene? We got a gentleman in the back.
Hello. I'm Dr. Marty Richardson of the Pawnee Indian Tribe. I'm here with Wopula Consulting, LLC. I'm wondering, what is the geographical area that you all covered? Because for me, as an East Coast native, I would like to make sure that our people are included in all these studies and all of, you know, for instance, I know someone from my community that was on America's Got Talent. She was one of the finalists for that. You know, we have a person that that plays in The Outsiders. That's a Tony nominee. So I'm just asking what the geographical or you know, what the area was that you all studied. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your question. So this study that we did, Nielsen and Illuminative this round, was really around the non-native representation and perceptions. And so it was weighted to represent total U.S. I think we did, there might have been a couple of cuts around like urban and rural. The experts, I think the work that you do that's so impressive is going to all 50 states and talking to Native peoples, which is always, as somebody in market research, is like, it's unheard of. So pat on the back. But it's an excellent point that, and again, I live in Maryland in the mid-Atlantic, so I feel you that, again, what my local Native folks might be talking about or concerned about is different than maybe folks in this region. I was speaking with somebody last night where offshore wind, completely disruptive here. My state just signed like a whole big to-do about offshore wind and like it's all very nuanced and localized. And I think that's the other part of the messaging that's really going to make a difference with folks is, again, if you know one Native story, you know one Native story. What's happening in your backyard might be different than what's happening across the country. Here's the overall narrative that we need, and here's a very local, localized representation and acknowledgement and research that we need.
No, I think that's such an important point. And that's the other thing. It's just the increased sophistication and nuance that we have to be getting in our messaging, our outreach, how we're talking to people and showing and not always telling, right? But I just want to say thank you for the shout out because around the research that we've done around Native people specifically. And my greatest co-conspirator on the planet, Miss Judith LeBlanc, sitting right here, head of the Native Organizers Alliance, and Illuminative have been in partnership since 2020 doing the Indigenous Futures Survey. And we've done it 3 times. And I think over the 3 times that we've done it, we have surveyed more than 15,000 Native people. So we just yeah, I know, right? And so that we just completed it, and we are getting ready to release the results of the Indigenous Future Survey starting in July, because there's some incredible things in there just for Native people and how we're feeling about different issues, all the things. So I just want to give a shout out, but that's coming soon, isn't it? Yes. Okay, more questions.
Hi, my name is Len Nessifer. I'm from the Navajo Nation. I run a company called Natives Outdoors. We do filmmaking, making documentaries, that sort of thing. I think one of the comments I want to add is we're talking about the importance of media, and one of the things that we've contended with as a film crew has been just the lack of resources available for us to just simply get over the hill to be able to do the thing. So, for example, the cameras that are needed to film the level and quality that are on the Netflix approved list easily run into the $30,000, $40,000 range, much less all the other ancillary equipment. And, you know, as much as we would like to control the media narrative, it's almost like the barrier simply has to be able to get to the place financially to do it. And I don't know what is available on your end or things that you've looked into on that capacity side on the front end of like, how do we get more people behind the camera? Because what we've seen is that a lot of times because we as a company are competing with kids with trust funds, companies, and we don't come from that. And so in many respects, we're kind of, yeah, I mean, it's a challenging position. As much as we want more media out there, it's like that sort of back end and the front end that needs to be built isn't there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what part of this is, and what's in the data, is we have a hell of a case to build. But there is so much, and you'll see the data that we're going to be sharing, there is so much there saying people want they want to know our stories. They want to see us. They want that content, and they cannot find it. So part of it is we got to show them where the good existing stuff is, but then we've got to be making those cases to media makers, you know, Hollywood, independent film. We need to be making it to philanthropy, all kinds of people with the resources to make it possible, right, to tell the stories. But I think the other thing that is a challenge for us is a distribution, right? We talk about that a lot. Like, distribution's always like, we have amazing stories. It's just like we're trying to get them out there and get lots of people to see it, right? I think part of that is us being like really like using our indigenous genius, and like we have to also create those markets for ourselves. We can't, and I think that's like some of the conversation post some of the collapse in Hollywood is like, okay, wait a minute, right? Like we have to kind of really start thinking outside of the box of different ways that we can get our stories out there. And I see amazing examples of how people are using TikTok and different things to kind of start creating buzzes around stories that all of a sudden the bigger media makers are like, huh, that's taken off on TikTok. We're going to throw some money at it. So I think this is where we have to really not only dare to imagine, but think outside of the box and kind of manifest new ways, right, of doing that to kind of deal with some of these real issues of resources.
100%. And I'll just add, like, those are the kinds of things that you need to take to your allies. Like, that's a tangible way that folks can help you crowdsourcing. Hey, this camera costs 30 grand. We want to get the show on Netflix. Like, you know, hey, $1, 50 cents, whatever. But those are actionable ways to show up for a community and pool our resources together that can make a huge difference. So I think in our industry, you'll see all kinds of like mentor programs. No, cut a check, please. Mentors are great, don't get me wrong, but also sometimes it really is just access to the thing. We hear that same story around like, again, I cannot afford the traditional path as an actor or someone like that because I'm coming from, you know, where we come from. And so it's just different economics, but I think, you know, that's exactly the kind of case to take to your allies and folks who say they want to be in support. Here's a perfect example. You can resource these storytellers so that they can actually go and give you what you say you're looking for.
I love that. Another question out in the audience?
I have a question. Shirley Snavy, Ponca Tribe in Nebraska. How were these surveys collected? Were these everyday man on the street interviews?
Yeah, great question. So another part of our methodology, this was a digital survey. So part of our online panel will go out and like through their digital lives sort of recruit people to be a part of Nielsen measurement and then have them fielded with a study like this and incentivized to complete the survey honestly and in full. So it is done online. It was about 2,500 people, and then our data scientists review that to make sure that it can project out to talk about general population. Thanks for the question.
Another question.
Kelsey up there. Hi, I'm Alyssa London. I'm a member of the Tlingit tribe. Oh, hey.
Oh my God, I'm such a big fan, sorry.
And I'm the native contributor at NBC, and I've been advocating for us to have an NBC Indigenous vertical. And so how does some of your data help me make that happen? In particular, this summer we're going to finally get to do 2 segments that are 2 to 3 minutes, and there's a couple producers that have been assigned to the work. But even in the pitch conversations of what I'm thinking those topics should be focused on, such as Ali Young, the power of the native vote, or some of the work that Illuminative is doing, some of the pushback that I get is how do we get the largely non-native audience to connect with any of these stories, or my favorite, aka the worst, how are we going to get this content to break through the presidential news cycle? And it's just frustrating to not have the exact comment back to those little zingers. And so I was hoping that both of you could give me some messaging in my arsenal for all these meetings that I have coming up.
First of all, so hi. Oh my gosh, I'm like a little starstruck. And then I'm gonna try and be like, I'm gonna put on my corporate hat, so just let me get my thoughts together. Because we'll sidebar about what you can really tell them. Yeah, I think part of it is not just what has worked or what we've relied on in the past. As journalists, especially in today's day and age, there's an obligation to tell these stories. to inform this electorate about not just their own community or the jazzy headline. These are important stories that are impacting all of us. This is, I mean, and if I'm an elected official, an untapped voter block, honey, I'm there. So again, if we just want to be self-serving, there's that part of it. But also, there's people don't know what they don't know. Imagine an opportunity to be first in this crowded field of cable news or whatever to tell this unique story, to help bring our viewers along on this journey they've never seen before. I think that is such a big opportunity, but I can definitely share some more, again, about the demand for hearing and learning more about that. We've seen progress around people going from, I don't know anything, to wanting to learn more. And that can't always be entertainment. Sometimes we have to be grown-ups and learn about the actual news and like real world things that are impacting us. But I would love to learn more about the topics you mentioned, and if there's anything in particular we can do to lay that groundwork. I remember someone we met at South by Southwest, the pushback she's getting is, again, the population is so small, why would we tell that story? Well, because when you tell my community story, it brings along America's key audience that's already spending 55% of their media time, 81 hours a week with media. It brings along the fastest growing population in the country, Asian Americans. It brings along, Hispanic Latino community that spend half of their time already streaming, but need to understand these issues as well. So I think that is where the power of the collective really comes into play. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's all the stuff from your boys at Nielsen that said, this is the collective power. So hopefully we'll stop having some of those conversations because again, I think it's a mindset shift again from the risk to the investment. When you have an investment, you nurture it, you research it, you understand that sometimes it's going to do even better than you expected, and sometimes it may do not as well as you expected, but you keep investing. When you think of our communities, historically excluded communities, as risks, that's a different mindset. It's like one and done. We tried that Native thing a couple years ago and it didn't work out. And we hear that, again, African Americans been here for a little while too, we still hear that same thing. But yeah, I think continue to do the work, continue to push, and I hope this data will be super powerful. You can definitely sidebar for real about not just my sassy remarks.
I want to be a part of that conversation. Well, and I think too, we will be sharing this data more, right, in its entirety. But there is so much promising data in there, again, like if you're looking for millennial, Gen Z audiences in particular, and just like people of color, I mean, there's interest. It's all sitting there. It's like prime for us. And I think one of the things that I would all encourage you to do is you're sitting here, right? Because there's so many things. Like we covered like a tenth of what is really in this study. But note your questions down now. What do you want to know more about? Right? How would you like to see this data? I mean, I think we've even been brainstorming, like, how do we potentially create these like toolkits that are very targeted by issue area for that very purpose, so that people kind of feel armed with different things. So write your questions down, note your ideas. That's when we go into the strategy tables tomorrow, that we will really document all that stuff, because we're not done with the research. You all are going to help us maybe where we need to go deeper, where we need to really focus in on some key points. This is the beginning point. So your feedback, your questions, your ideas are going to be really important. I'm getting the 2-minute warning up here, but I'm going to squeeze in one more quick question. Hurry, somebody.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, it was all about proximity to the microphone. I saw somebody was really trying back there.
Hello, my name's Omish Dewi Foster. I am the first timer here and also here with the Center of Native American Youth. I wrote down my question was, what are your thoughts on censorship? As I am a grassroots organizer rooted in solidarity and indigenous resistance, I guess, like, do you see different sectors of media supporting, like, topics of injustice and just things that need to be talked about and were being censored, and how that can be uplifted in this community without being frowned upon, and just encouraging more people to walk in that realm rather than shy away from it and find empowerment in it?
Great question. I think the bottom line, as we get the 1-minute warning, is people don't like to be uncomfortable. People don't like to be the villain in the story. People don't like to find out that what they've held as true, you mean this whole time I got a head start? You mean I'm not really like the best and brightest that my mommy told me? Like, people don't like that. And so getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, especially when you might be in a position of privilege, we're not used to that. And so I think some of it is you have to start small. However, especially for those of us in these communities where sometimes it is life or death, it's urgency. And it's also not always up to us to have that labor, which is why our allies, I think, are so critical. But you're 100% right. There is censorship of that. There is a sort of resistance to that. Great current example that I will leave you with, again, from my community is going back to the sports world. I don't know if there's any baseball fans, but recently Major League Baseball decided to incorporate the stats from the Negro Leagues. Thank you. Huge, long overdue piece of restorative justice, because again, it is a way to just expose everyday casual racism. Because who we refer to as number one, who we think of as just worthy of mention, period, excluded an entire league of people just purely based off race. And there are still tons of fans who are struggling with, well, why would we include them? You included the other leagues. Like the legit only reason why these numbers aren't included is because these folks were black. And so I think it's sometimes we have the privilege of slow walking folks, but I think especially so many of our communities right now are in a sense of urgency when it comes to just basic rights, freedoms, life or death, safety, that we do feel like we're just gonna have to get uncomfortable. And so sometimes media will be our partner in that, sometimes that's the work that you do, but for sure it's gonna take all of us. You're spot on, that it's super uncomfortable, and I think that's what drives a lot of it, is just fear and not being used to being exposed around the story we've been told.
How do you follow that? I mean, I want to say thank you for that, and thank you for that question. And I think the challenge that we are faced with, and that we learned from the first time we did Reclaiming Native Truth, is words matter, and how we say things matter, and even how much of what we say matters. Like, we as a tendency as Native peoples are like, I'm gonna give you all 500 plus years of history right now. And everybody's like, whoa. It's understanding that it could be smaller doses. We need to change it up. We need to come up with new tactics, new strategies, so that people can see us and hear us, because people don't like to be uncomfortable. I think there's a lot more that we need to understand about the kind of social justice fatigue that's hitting this country. I think we gotta get under stuff more and not just get frustrated that things, I mean, I remember conversations we used to be having with people that everybody's like, we don't want to talk about that no more. So I think that's the challenge to us. But Charlene, you are a sister. The moment that Illuminative met you and Nielsen changed everything for us. And when I think about what can be done with what we have here, and believe me, Charlene and I are already talking about conspiring for what's going to come next, I want to say thank you, because it is really not only about being allies and solidarity, it's about being relatives, and we just want to say thank you. So everybody give it up for Charlene and Nielsen.